Hello, everyone. Welcome to episode 6 of the Day Zero podcast. I'm Spectre, and with me is Z, and he isn't with us again this week. So welcome to episode 6. So, in this episode, we're going to be first talking about a new tool that's been dropped for binary analysis and rewriting. Just to clarify a little bit, by rewriting, do they mean basically like what I call monkey patching? Is that basically the same idea?
That seemed to be what I got from giving this quick read over.
Okay. Yeah, so basically this tool is for monkey patching binaries. So if there's like a vulnerability or whatever, and for some reason you can't recompile from source, or you want to do a quick like hot fix before doing like a rebuild and whatnot, you can basically patch the binary and relink it or whatever to remove the vulnerable piece of code. So this
Yeah,
is
it's
essentially what
kind
this
of
tool
worth
aims to do.
mentioning, actually. This came out of the Cyber Grand Challenge. So I don't know how familiar you are with the challenge, but that was when
I'm not. What is it?
I know we've talked about it before, not on the podcast, but it was the kind of like the automated DEF CON team. They participated in like the DEF CON main game a couple years ago now, I think. They participated during 2 years. So the idea was that they would essentially be a like they would be able to take the binaries like in the DEF CON main game and automatically kind of patch those or fix them.
Okay.
So
Okay.
that's kind of what this was born out of. The Cyber Grand Challenge. I don't remember how much DARPA was actually offering as prize money. And if I recall correctly, pretty much all of these automated systems, while they're definitely make some progress, I don't think they did very well compared to the human teams. I don't have the stats on hand. I probably should have looked that up before this. But I think it's interesting to kind of see something actually coming out of that, not just a theory, but now here are some actual tools that are coming out from that.
Yeah, I actually do remember you talking a little bit about that now. Um, yeah, so it's they also, not only do they have a tool, but they also have a library. I don't know if you saw that. I think that's pretty neat. I think it's a bit further down here. They talk a little bit about the library. Let me just see. I think it's still talking about the tool, but yeah, they've provided a library along with it, and so for serialization they use Google's protobuf, and it's under the MIT license, so you can use it with whatever you want to do. Pretty much, the MIT license is pretty open. Uh, I noticed they had some cheeky lines in there, talking about where was it? I forget exactly what the line was, but yeah. But it's cool because this is yet another free tool, right? So we've had Ghidra for for disassembling and stuff like this, and the decompiler, and now we have this as another free tool. Because I know they talked about other tools like Anger that exists, but is Anger paid, or is it?
I haven't used that, so
I can't remember if it's open source or not. We can take a look here, I guess.
yeah, it's open
Um,
source.
okay, it is open source, so yeah, never mind that, I guess. But yeah, it is just even more tools coming out.
Yeah, I mean, there's people are always kind of releasing their scripts and stuff. Like we're always kind of getting a dump of things, but like I said, I think it's cool just to see this coming out of the DARPA program. Well, not out of DARPA, but like out of that Cyber Grand Challenge.
Yeah,
Just as a real applicable thing coming out of it. And I mean, the tool does seem a little bit interesting. I didn't get a chance to dig too deeply into how it worked. They walk through not too much of the technical details, but enough to kind of give you an idea of what it's doing and how this is useful.
yeah. Yeah, so I think maybe this could also be useful for like CTF type stuff, possibly. I could see maybe challenges incorporating uh this kind of aspect to it.
Well, the challenge
For
incorporating it, or as a player being able to utilize this type of tool. I mean, since
well,
the Grand Challenge was based around the CTF.
I was thinking kind of both. I can't think off the top of my head how you could use it in like a Jeopardy style CTF. Uh,
Well, just
you maybe use it for
finding the
like army
vulnerabilities in
challenges.
general.
Yeah. But yeah, like you said, definitely it would definitely be helpful for like the attack and defense CTS because that's where it was born out of, right? So
Yeah.
yeah. So yeah, we'll move on from that. We'll go to the ct-fuzz. So I'll just timestamp that. So we're on ct-fuzz. So what this is basically for is fuzzing for timing leaks. So these are basically side channel attacks. So it's primarily crypto focused, right? You basically use timing attacks against a crypto system to try to glean some information about a key or something like that, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's in
Um,
crypto is one place. Well, generally, it's information leaks, so leaking internal information. Usually, like one of the most common places you'll see timing issues are in password comparison. So, you enter your password on a website, and it hashes in, then it does like equals equals some other password, dot string compare, whatever. It just does a string compare, and when it does that, you might have it like it's going to look at character 0 versus character 0 of like the expected string and the input string. And then if they match, it goes to character 1. If they match, it goes to character 2. If they match, it goes to character 3. But if it fails, it just returns. So that means if you get that means the time it takes to calculate if they match goes up the more characters that actually match.
yeah, that's true. I never really thought about that.
Well, so that's kind of what this. I mean, there are other things that this can also pick up on, but like that's probably one of the most common cases of a timing-based information leak. Is just looking at the timing for like that type of comparison, comparing two things. There should be a constant time comparison being done. It should,
Yeah.
iterate over all the characters, for example, not just returning as soon as it's different.
Yeah.
So what I thought was interesting with this though is, I mean, one, just most fuzzers are, looking at memory safety. Pretty much what you'd expect the fuzzer to do. When you mention fuzzing, you think about those types of issues. You're looking for crashes. So I kind of like this is it takes an idea to find timing based issues, which are definitely very subtle issues, especially when we are talking about seeing them in crypto.
Yeah.
They aren't issues that are immediately obvious. It takes a lot of different executions to kind of notice it if you're doing a manual assessment. So what they do here is they'll basically run. So they use AFL fuzz as for text generation, for coverage information, for things like that. But the key thing that they do differently is that they execute the program twice, and use the coverage information to see if the two runs are relatively equal or if they're distinct from each other. So I mean, you don't want to compare the timing of two executions when they're doing completely different things. If the fuzz test was totally different, but if the two cases have essentially like the similar coverage, but they have a difference in, I think they use the term distinguishable execution run. So
Yeah.
if they see a difference in timing, that's how they know there's a timing issue. It seems really obvious, but as far as I know, like I haven't seen any tools that actually do that or implement that. It seems really obvious, just mentioning it. Like, of course, you compare the two execution times. So no, I'm kind of interested to see what this might be able to find.
Yeah, so I did want to touch on that a bit because, especially when you get to the crypto level and you're getting to like hardware level timing attacks, it's quite complex, right? And like you said, it's not an immediately obvious thing. And you were talking about how it compares the two executions of a program with mutated inputs. And I looked through the paper a bit and I saw they used a few interesting tricks. One of them was they actually used JE-malloc for they replaced the allocated with JE-malloc so that the allocations for the heap were more deterministic so that it would be more consistent to try to find those timing issues more accurately. And it would also like fork from the existing process to keep the same address space and everything like that. Uh, and the other interesting thing I saw was it said it generated per program input processors, but I'm not entirely sure what they meant by that. I don't know if maybe you saw something that I didn't there. But I imagine it's just basically saying that for each program they have its own like input generator kind of thing. Now that being said, there are some specific information that it needs to work with. You need to provide it with some argument information. Requires some some special environment setup, some default values, and obviously it doesn't detect all types of information leakage. It's only the ones that, like the more subtle ones, it can't really pick up. I saw.
Yeah, which I
Uh,
mean is actually it's an important thing though, because these are more subtle issues. It's not a crash that you're looking for; it's the subtle timing difference. So I mean, like it's something that matters. Providing argument information, like I mean, that's just setting up your fuzzer essentially. And yeah, sometimes the fuzzer needs to be built special. All of that, those are given. This is userland. This is fuzzing a program that you can run yourself, not like I don't know a network fuzz over binary blind or something.
yeah, yeah, but I think the biggest takeaway from this idea, this tool, is that we are starting to see tools now for more and more complex issues. Because I remember we were talking about on a previous podcast about stuff like race conditions that are more subtle, that we don't know if it'll be possible to automate finding those within the foreseeable future. But this is another issue like race conditions that are pretty difficult to find. It's a complex issue. And like this tool seems like it's pretty it's a pretty good step in that direction.
Yeah, I mean, there's kind of going to be questions about the granularity of the timing issues, like how subtle of a timing issue can it be before it picks it up.
Yeah.
There are going to be issues like that come out of this, but I mean, like with so many things, it's a step in the right direction.
Yeah, it's not a final goal or anything like that. But yeah, so I'm really interested in to see what happens with this, see if it maybe grows and becomes like AFL is like a pretty much industry standard for fuzzing, right? And I'm wondering if this might become a new industry standard for testing stuff like crypto chips and stuff like that, where timing attacks are common. So that'll be cool to see if that does eventually happen.
In my opinion, it's probably not going to become industry standard. There might be somebody that then takes this idea and builds something off of it. Usually, I mean, as far as I know, there wasn't any like big release of this. It was just a paper published. I'm
Yeah, I
not
didn't see
sure if
anything with
they
big release.
had a conference with it associated with this one or not. But I mean, my guess is it's more likely somebody will kind of build off of this in the future, perhaps, or we might start seeing it implemented into like some of the big name scanners. Just kind of doing that. Actually, big name scanners maybe not, just because that's fuzzing, not so much scanning. But
yeah,
I mean, I'm not hopeful that this particular implementation is going to take off, but the idea seems so simple. I mean, I could definitely see somebody running with the same idea, building something else, or maybe it has been done and I'm just not aware of it.
Yeah, I wouldn't. Yeah, I mean, yeah, like you said, it is a simple concept. I could see it being done before, but I haven't heard of one either. So, yeah, so that's pretty much everything on that topic. The next thing we're going to cover is some news. So we're going to cover the MalwareTech plead. He pleaded
surprise,
guilty.
Surprise. Let's be honest. I don't think anybody really thought there was going to be a not guilty plea with this.
Yeah. So I remember hearing about this case a little while ago, because there was something where I think the article even mentions this, but I remember there was something where he was saying the FBI questioned him and like misled him into thinking he was helping to solve another case when they were trying to get him to indict himself or something like that. And there was other things where he was, sleep deprived and whatever because of DEF CON.
Yeah, because I think they arrested him like right after DEF CON.
Yeah. And the thing he was basically taken in on was writing banking malware. So, I saw a lot of posts talking about, how it was everybody writes malware and rootkits and whatnot when they're young, or like all hackers do or whatever. But that being said, banking malware, it's not really your run-of-the-mill skitty type thing. Banking malware is a pretty serious type of malware.
I mean, so I think a lot of people kind of write the rats. You're getting started learning to program, kind of playing around with certain things like, okay, or remote access. And that can include a ton of different features. That said, I mean, it's definitely on a different level. Because, I mean, one of the big concerns here is, does his arrest kind of lead to a slippery slope? Are kind of other developers, these people that just are hackers and all of that, that kind of write kind of some of the software that's questionably legal, are we suddenly going to be facing prosecution because of these questionable programs that have been written? And I think there's kind of a question of dual use and remote access trojans or tools. You think there's dual use there. It could either be used as a trojan, it could be used as a tool. There's a dual purpose in kind of what's there. As soon as you start selling it, like for banking malware, there are very few reasons to, be scanning for the credit card numbers. Like just writing it, you can probably get away with just writing it, but as soon as you're trying to sell that, there kind of comes down to the question of would a reasonable person think that this is being used for nefarious purposes or for good purposes? And that's where I think this kind of falls apart, is there aren't a lot of good purposes that come out of the type of banking malware that he seemed to be developing. Even if it was a while in the past, I'm not sure what the time frame was between kind of his arrest and when he actually wrote this and tried to sell it, but
I think it was a few years. I think it was like 4 or 5 years or something like that.
yeah, so I could definitely see him having changed a fair bit in those years. Like, people change. It sucks, but at the same time, what do you really say? He's wrote banking malware. There aren't a lot of legitimate uses for that, especially when he starts selling it. Now, I don't know where he sold it.
Yeah.
I mean, you could argue something like, oh, well, I want to be able to monitor my computer to make sure I don't accidentally enter my credit card information somewhere. That's why I'm monitoring the network traffic for credit card information. Like, I could imagine some story that you can spin for that. It's not a regular part of anybody's tool set to do that. I guess you could maybe call, as part of like a outbound WAF or something, or I guess not WAF, but just outbound firewall doing deep packet inspection. But
yeah,
I mean, that's the thing. You have to frame these things correctly when you build them. And my understanding is he basically framed these as what they are: banking trojans. Like it's. I haven't seen the tool. I just imagine like, a hack forums post or something offering it.
Probably, yeah. But I did see a few people that I know were saying that he's probably going to get out on a deal. Do you think that that's a possibility?
If he was selling, if he's willing to kind of rat out on people that maybe sold to contacts that he had at that point, I could see him being offered a deal. Like, in all fairness, it has been a number of years. I don't know what the statute of limitations is. I know for cybercrime, it's actually not all that long. I mean, 5 years would still, I believe, be under it. But I mean, if he's, I guess I would just have to say, like, yeah, okay. If he has information, I could see them offering him a deal. I don't even think he necessarily needs to spend a lot of time in prison over this. Like, I'm definitely not pushing to say, like, oh, he should be sentenced to, like, the maximum of, 10 years or whatever it is. Like,
yeah, 10 years is the max. I don't think that's reasonable.
Oh, that won't happen. I mean, it's the max. Yeah. That means it shouldn't happen. And I just say in this case, like, I definitely don't think he should be, especially it's been a few years. Obviously, he was involved with taking down WannaCry. Although I guess there were the rumors that he was also behind WannaCry, but I don't really buy those.
Getting into tinfoil hack category there.
Yeah, well, I think it was just because he was arrested right shortly after that, because DEF CON happened shortly after that also. So that's where I think that rumor came from. Obviously, I'm not buying that, but it's clear, like, he's on the blue team now, basically. Maybe he's still doing some stuff. I don't think anything will have come up. So, I mean, my opinion is he's no longer a threat. Slap him on the wrist or whatever and leave it at that.
Yeah, and I did want to add there the 10 years or whatever maximum that the article states, that is over 2 charges as well, and the max on those charges is 5 years. So you have to get like max on both of them to get 10. So I think it's pretty much impossible that he gets 10. I don't even think he should get 5, to be honest. Like, I think 1 to 2 is more reasonable.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think we're kind of driving into some of the more political aspects of the whole prison system, and
Yeah, we'll back into that real quick.
yeah, I mean, it's an area we can definitely dive deep into, but I don't think we need to for this. I would just say, maybe he has contacts to kind of have a deal and has information like that. If he's willing to kind of share that, yeah, if he'll get a deal, I can't see any reason why he wouldn't. I don't know if he'd be willing to. I don't know, what he feels like about snitches and all of that. There's obviously a lot of opinions on that.
Yeah.
I'd understand it if he did, though.
Okay. All right. Yeah. So we'll move on to the next piece of news, which is this. I swear to God, we covered this like 2 episodes ago.
Well, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, but the last time we covered this, it was specifically of Facebook accounts. Now it's their Instagram users.
Yeah,
and it's
so
actually the same issue too. It's again logging of passwords. So they say, oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say, for those of you listening, the title of the article is basically Facebook admits to storing plain text passwords for millions of Instagram users. So that's what we're talking about here. Go on.
Yeah, so it's basically the same issue as last time. Last time when we had a similar issue, it was Facebook was logging passwords. That's the key thing. It's not some developer decide, oh yeah, we should store these in plain text. This is, they log them in plain text. Like they just, like I kind of theorized, overzealous logging, like, oh yeah, just log the entire request. Like the entire request body when some random error happens, and that way they can kind of figure out what happened by replaying that. And, maybe happened on a login, happened on a redirect after a login, something where the password kind of ended up in that request. So because this is kind of coming out now, they say it was from a routine scan. I'd be willing to bet that they kind of saw this in the Facebook and they're like, now was this logging added anywhere else? And now they're looking at their other applications and found that indeed it was in Instagram. Just the timing seems too much for it to just be a routine scan, unless they're
definitely. Yeah.
I mean, the other possibility is whoever does the routine scan is now aware that happened before, last month, and therefore when they looked at it this time, they picked it up.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think it's more of the former, to be honest. And so, yeah, Instagram on top of Facebook now has this issue. Facebook said that its investigation, that there was no like evidence of abuse of the plain text passwords access, which is basically what they said the last time with Facebook as well. But what I thought was an interesting piece of the article here was the quote. Let me go to it here. It said, they're being criticized on social media for trying to bury the security update by releasing it on the same day as the Mueller report. That is a pretty interesting, like timing, right? Because we know that Facebook, Facebook's been getting a lot of bad PR lately, so it would make a lot of sense if they wanted to do something like that.
Yeah, and I mean, we don't have enough information to say if they did or didn't. I tend to want to be charitable and saying, oh well, it's just kind of accidental, but
that's fair.
So what day was this out on, like a Monday?
Let me just see. This was posted on April 18th, which was a Thursday. Yeah.
So that's a weird day also to kind of choose to release this, because obviously I would assume they knew about this at least for a little bit before they announced it. It wasn't just, oh, we found out about during this internal review, therefore let's announce it like today. So yeah, that does make it seem a little bit sketchy that they chose to release on the same day, because obviously somebody chose to release it. But it could also be based on a policy. They find out about it, they give themselves 5 days to release it or something like that. They could have some internal working policy about how they handle that type of disclosure.
Yeah.
Again, just try and come up with a more charitable explanation than the intentionally trying to bury it. But I mean, I definitely wouldn't put past Facebook.
Yeah, it is Facebook after all. Yeah, so we don't want to go too deep into this because it's basically a similar story to the one we've already covered. We'll leave a link in the description down below to the time code in a previous episode where we talked about this if you want more information on that. So we're just going to move right into some out of the news and into some protection news. So the first protection we have up is this. So Google's basically blocking sign-ins from embedded browser frameworks starting in June. And the reason for that is they're trying to combat phishing attacks. And one of the more difficult to detect phishing attacks is like man-in-the-middle attacks with browser frameworks. So if you have like a malicious browser framework, you send the data to it, it can copy it or do whatever malicious things it wants with it, and then it could send it to Google.
Well, so I'm
And
not sure that's quite the case here. Like, it is man in the
that's
middle.
what I read. Like,
Well,
that's
it
what
just mentions kind of man in the middle, but I imagine one of the cases there is where it's literally somebody on the network who's intercepting and then replaying that same traffic through, like, in a way that they can control it, rather than it being an actual interception of, I guess a better way to put it is imagine like a phishing page. So you have a phishing page, user tries to log in there, so then they use kind of the scriptable or embeddable browser to actually kind of take the information they input on the phishing page and send that to Google and pretend to be the user for them. Because
maybe
that's the type of man in the middle I think they're talking about, not the type where it's like network traffic just sitting on there, like SSL strip type thing.
Okay, that makes a bit more sense. Maybe
So
maybe I
this would
misread
be
that.
somebody fishes the password, fishes the single sign-on, and just replays them to Google. But now so to the end user, like, it seems okay because they're getting all the right responses back from Google. They're just not actually browsing Google. It's just kind of being proxied to them.
Yeah.
So I mean, this kind of follows after a few other changes that have been made in the past too. Like, I think, what was it, last year or so? They started blocking
They required
sign-ons.
JavaScript to be enabled.
Right, last year was JavaScript being enabled, but back in 2016, they disallow things like the embedded browsers, like on an Android phone. Like your Android web view UI, like that type of element. They disallowed logging in from that. So this is just kind of like a continuation of that. And I mean, they're kind of pushing in general people just to use OAuth, their OAuth system, get the ground code there, use that to communicate over to the API, use that. And I mean, I'm totally okay with that. And I want to say, like, this type of requirement, I mean, one, requiring JavaScript, at this point, kind of the no script battle is kind of lost. You need JavaScript on the modern web. That's kind of done. Still use things like Umatrix and stuff, but I mean, this is an effective thing, I think, for preventing these types of man-in-the-middle attacks. Just not a lot of people are really going to be logging in with these types of, embedded browsers and stuff. So using OAuth, if you're writing a legitimate application, makes sense. That said, that's because Google has a huge API library. A lot of their services have these APIs. You can use OAuth, and you can use like the bearer token you get there. You can use that to access the copycats that are like, well, Google's blocking this, therefore we should. They don't necessarily do that. And that's where problems come in, because now, I mean, maybe you just shouldn't be automating their websites then. We can kind of argue about that, because that would probably be terms of service, but I mean, it's worth paying attention to the fact that Google has provided an alternative here.
Yeah.
Copycats, I have a fear, might not.
Yeah, that's I didn't really consider like copycats. That's a good point. Yeah, I mean, I was looking at it a little bit, and it mentioned explicitly the Chromium embedded framework, and I was curious to see if this protection would really break many things. So I looked at some of the things that use the Chromium embedded framework. So I looked at like some game clients, BattleNet, Unreal Engine, Adobe Creative Cloud, some email clients use it.
But do they use it to actually log in, or do they do OAuth?
But that's what I was gonna say. I can't see many of them. Like, some of them don't even deal with Google products, so they wouldn't even need Google Auth. And I imagine the other ones, like OAuth, is an option as well. So Yeah, I was looking at, like, I don't know specifically on the products that do use Google sign in. I don't know if they use OAuth or not. After June, I guess they're not really going to have much of a choice in that regard. But I don't think it's going to really break many of the existing applications, at least not past like a 1 day update or anything like that.
No, I mean
So
it'll break the malware using it. It'll break the phishing sites.
yeah,
In terms
it
of
won't
actually
break
trying to
like
build
legitimate apps.
something, OAuth is really the path of least resistance when it comes down to it. Also, I mean,
Yeah,
yeah,
it's
you
pretty easy to
can
use.
try and fake like all the requests and like scrape the page and everything. You totally can do that, but you can also get all the information you need right out of the OAuth, like out of the API. So like that is the easiest path. So most developers, I imagine, are doing that. I can't imagine there's going to be a lot of applications that are breaking because of this, but I do think it is an effect of mitigation to those types of man in the middle attacks.
Yeah, and I agree on that. I think it's a good move by Google. So moving on to the next
This next
piece of
one,
news and
a
protection
patent.
patent. Yeah.
I
So
don't know how you feel about the patents, but just kind of give the rundown here. PayPal is patenting a ransomware detection. Pretty simple system. Essentially, the gist of this is looks at the cache to see if there's content that was loaded from a file, looks at the original or determines whether or not dirty cache entry or whatever, if the file was being modified, determines if that modification is an encrypted version of the original content. And basically, if it thinks it's an encrypted version, it's ransomware. It detects it that way.
so is there the potential for false positives with that? Is there
Oh, of course, there's potential for false positives, potential for false negatives. I mean, I don't. It's a patent, so they don't really go into a lot of details over how they determine it's
Yeah, I noticed that.
modification is an encrypted version. Just they detect that somehow. They determine that somehow. But I don't know. I have concerns more around the fact that this is being patented rather than
You
necessarily
don't
the effectiveness of it.
Oh, you don't like the idea that it could be exclusive to PayPal, where it could be.
Is this even an original idea? I mean, I maybe the way, because they mentioned specifically the cache versus say hooking syscalls or something. Like I'm not sure
Yeah.
how like Malwarebytes does it and stuff, but I would be surprised if this is like an original idea.
That's fair, and I think there was a bit of a controversy over this patent because when I was looking into it, it was like it was actually approved. Like people were expecting it to be rejected or something like that.
When do
And
patents? I mean, patents probably do get rejected, but I always hear about stupid patents being approved.
yeah, what I wonder about though is there a potential privacy concern with PayPal being able to uh do that kind of scanning?
Well, I
Like you
mean,
said, it
we don't
doesn't
know
go.
how they're using this. We don't know how they're going to deploy this
Yeah,
or anything.
exactly. Like
This
that's
very
what
well
I'm
might
kind
be
of worried
something they
about.
just license out to antiviruses or use it to like patent troll antiviruses that already do this. I'm not sure
Okay, that
about
is true.
PayPal's history with patent trolling at all, but I mean, we don't know if it's going to be PayPal using this. They're just the ones who are patenting it.
Yeah, I guess it's a hard question to answer without knowing the technical details, which we won't get in this patent, unfortunately. But the other thing I wanted to ask was, so they mentioned that the main focus of this is to try to prevent ransomware from using PayPal as like a payment method for the extortion, right? But is PayPal really that common of a payment service for malware for ransomware to use? Like I've mostly only seen Bitcoin. I don't really see PayPal.
I usually see Bitcoin. I wouldn't be surprised to hear, there's somebody trying to use PayPal with it. Um,
I mean, it
at
just
the
seems
same
like
time,
PayPal's
it's
super
like
traceable.
the
Like,
yeah. I mean, the it's not an ideal choice by any means if you're actually trying to get away with something. I wouldn't be surprised, but this just seems like they needed to have a reason for it. To kind of explain it. It definitely is kind of tangentially related. They're effectively like a banking system. Like, this is related to, like, you could understand their concern about ransomware and how it will impact their clients. I don't see, they're not a client-side thing, so I don't know how they plan to actually apply this.
Yeah, that's the big question. Hopefully we get an answer to that soon, though. Because
or
I think how it's deployed
PayPal desktop application runs in Electron.
PayPal desktop web apps.
Well, PayPal JS.
PayPal.js, yes. Yeah, I think hopefully we get more information on how it's deployed. Like you said, maybe it's just an in-house thing for certain companies that they'll offer a service to. Maybe it won't be a widespread deployment thing. Hopefully we do get an answer to that soon, but I wouldn't be surprised if we don't.
I don't know. So does PayPal, like, do they have ownership of any like antivirus company? I don't think so.
I don't think so. I if there is a connection, I don't know of it.
Yeah, like I don't know. Like, this is a weird patent to come out. PayPal, like I said, I could understand their concerns about ransomware. I just don't see how they have any plans to apply this. Unless they want a patent troll. Like, that's honestly the only thing I'm seeing here is, now they have the patent, so all of these antivirus creators, they're going to now have to pay PayPal because they own the patent. Obviously,
PayPal's not exactly.
Sorry,
PayPal's. I was just gonna say PayPal's not exactly the most like nice company or anything. They can be assholes sometimes, so I wouldn't be surprised if it was just a patent troll, like you're saying.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think PayPal has a history of patent trolling. So, like, I'm hoping that's not the case. It's just, I've honestly, like, trying to give a charitable explanation. I just don't know what they'd be doing with this patent.
Yeah.
Maybe they are just, like, maybe they've announced somewhere, like, they're patenting it, but it's so everybody can use. Like, they're not going to go after them, like... Which, actually, I guess Tesla did something like that. And, I mean, I don't think Elon's involved with PayPal at all anymore, but...
Yeah, I was going to say, there is that former connection between PayPal and SpaceX, right? Or
yeah, well, SpaceX, Tesla, like, all three.
Yeah.
I mean, so they have released patents in that sense. Maybe it's something like that. I just don't know if PayPal's announced anything. But, I mean, even just being able to patent an algorithm like this, like I said, there are some questions about how useful this is. Or not how useful, how original this is.
Yeah. I mean, I'd like to talk about it a bit more, but there's just not much information there from like a technical standpoint about.
Yeah, I mean, the patent idea, this isn't really hacking related at all. Diving into the details, they just don't have enough information for us to really say how effective this would be. I mean, it seems like it could be effective depending on how they do the determination. I could imagine there being more false negatives than false positives.
Yeah. So, yeah, we just wanted to bring that up, but hopefully more information gets, like, there's something actually done with this patent later on. But
yeah, I'm definitely most interested to see what happens with this.
Yeah. So let's talk about some self-driving car stuff. And yeah, we love talking about AI on this.
I mean, that's one of the big things being researched right now is AI-based attacks. And I mean, we actually have we have at least one more coming up after this. I mean, for this one, it's another case of just trying to get the neural network to misclassify something. So they kind of had to focus in a lot of the talking, or in a lot of the content around steering angle, kind of making it think that it should be turning left or turning right or going straight when it should be doing something else. This one, you do need control over the images coming in from the camera, or at least some of the frames. So that means this is already a compromised vehicle. It's not like being able to just attach something on the road. That said, I mean, essentially the messages are flowing through the CAN bus. You get CAN bus control. You can forge frames coming in. If you can forge frames coming in, though, you can also just
do
replace the
other
entire image.
yeah
So I'm not sure how
useful it is.
Yeah, at the very least, this is minor modifications. Uh, Most of like essentially what it looked like in all the cases was that the image was just a little bit darker. Obviously, they made some other very minor modifications, but like a human analyzing the data, say this was used to kill someone, um, it wouldn't be obvious. And I think that's kind of what's important about this one is it's not like this is something that again is kind of stealthy. It's something that someone can analyze the footage that came in, assuming it's all being recorded, and actually make a claim that like it doesn't appear to have been tampered with. Um, if you scroll down, I think they have a few of the sample images.
Yeah, I think I remember seeing those. But yeah, so just to add on a little bit there, so a lot of car AI, like auto driving stuff, is cameras and sensors, right? And like you said, you do need like control of the ECU. So you spoof images and send them to the camera from the CAN bus. And I mean, yeah, like there's like you said, if you already have control of that, you can send like just a black box if you wanted to. Like, it seems like something that's more of a stealth attack. So it's kind of an interesting premise about how these slightly modified images can make that much of a difference to how it's being parsed. But
Yeah, and I mean this is something that it seems to be kind of the common attack here is a lot of these things. It's these very subtle issues that are intentionally malicious. They're adversarial images. They are intended to cause problems. And it's like most of the AI just isn't trained on that type of data. It's not trained with this idea that there's an intentionally malicious aspect to it. And I think that's the problem. Um,
yeah,
so
one thing I do wonder though, looking at these images, is they look like they could be images taken in legitimate scenarios, like depending on the environment. Like just looking at it, like the one on the right or the one on the left, but it says right. That was confusing. But it says like it's brighter, right? You can tell that it's brighter. Depending on like
yeah, that's
external factors.
the input image is saying like, okay, it reads that and knows it should go right because it can see that right turn coming up.
Yeah,
So that's why it's labeled there. And yeah, that's kind of what I meant by it looks brighter, or sorry, the attack images all look darker. I think they kind of talk a little bit about how they create these. But I don't think it had anything interesting like the one where they were using like a specific pattern to backdoor the network.
yeah.
In this case, it's just slight modifications that end up leading to the misreading.
Yeah, so I assume this kind of attack you'd probably employ as maybe a potential like post exploit thing that you wanted to do,
Well, I
because you
mean,
do
you
need
need
that
that
access.
canvas, so there needs to be a
Yeah,
further compromise. I mean, a further compromise can literally just be plugging into the vehicle. Like, it could literally just be a hardware drop on it. It doesn't
yeah,
need to be like some remote attack or anything.
yeah. Now, do you think it's reasonable to expect protections against these kinds of attacks within the next couple of years, like against the uh like adversarial evasion attacks, I think they're
I
called?
think it's something that needs to be considered. I mean, because this is definitely a widespread issue, as there are. I mean, we've covered it on like almost every episode. We've had some type of adversarial image, leading to problems, whether it be in vehicle to vehicle, or sorry, vehicle imaging. But even when it's not in that, it's still. I mean, it definitely, honestly, doing this podcast has made me actually lose a little bit of trust in self-driving vehicles. I mean, we talked about it on like the first episode, and the more I've kind of looked in and seen some of these attacks, the more I'm seeing like, yeah, okay, self-driving can work in like these really good conditions and like the normal condition, but it seems like neural networks and stuff are just so soft when it comes to any sort of adversarial input.
They just, I guess they weren't really designed for like keeping that in mind, which is dumb. But
Yeah, I
like
mean,
it's
I
happened
think
before,
if we
so
start training with some adversarial data sets, like start training them to look for that. And that said, as the data set grows more, as there's more variance in the data, as there's simply more data being collected and analyzed, it becomes harder to pull off. I believe they even mentioned that in this one where um, some of the models were or did have that basically didn't have the same success rate over every model. And it was in particular the models that had more data were less successful.
yeah. I mean, what I wonder is, obviously, I think there will be a push to try to prevent against these types of attacks in the future as it becomes more of a known issue. But will it be too late? We're already seeing AI and self-driving cars on the road today. So, like cars that are already on the road today are probably vulnerable. Well, are definitely vulnerable to these types of attacks. And by the time that we start getting wise to these types of attacks, like stuff could already have happened, right?
Well, I mean, we already kind of see some of the Tesla deaths where even if it wasn't malicious, where it just like, drove into the divider on the road because they thought the lane was in the middle when like at a highway split. And just like drove off the road. I mean, we already kind of see those. They're maybe not malicious, but they're just problems in the training data.
Yeah.
And that's a big reason why a lot of people just aren't going to adopt the self-driving cars. And not just, I mean, I hear a lot of people say, oh, well, once self-driving cars are just a little bit safer, everybody's going to switch. And the reality is there's a difference in the type of danger when it's this robot that has an issue where it's like, you don't have any control. It's not my safe driving. Most people are going to think they're above average drivers. Obviously, the average person is going to be below, or like half the people are going to be below average and half the people are going to be above average, but everybody thinks they're above average.
I'm a good driver. What do you mean?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I don't think adoption's going to be very quick, especially with these issues, because, I mean, I would rather have my life be based on how good of a driver I was, not the programmer who wrote that part of the AI or whatever data got trained, whatever in there, having the robot make it, because those mistakes that the robot makes, they're very non-human issues. They're things people are going to be adverse to, simply in a sense. I like the term exotic risk. Even if it's not actually that risky, people kind of avoid it because it's exotic. Or it's an exotic risk. It's a risk they don't see very often.
Yeah, I mean, I'm definitely cynical of AI when it comes to cars. Like we've talked about it a lot on this podcast, and like you said, like I think we should just rename the podcast to AI Cynics, because it shouldn't be. I don't think it should be used in cars. It's just too like.
I'm still hopeful for it, and I've said like I really just want to be able to get on the freeway and have it go. I don't care about the last mile. I don't care about the city driving. But I've done a ton of freeway driving where like I've driven, 2,000 kilometers down the same freeway. It's boring. That can be automated. Especially straight, because this is like whatever interstate it is running down basically just straight north-south into Oklahoma. So like along like Missouri, Kansas, the border there and stuff. It's such a boring drive. So I want this. Like I would love a vehicle that could drive that. But yeah, I mean, I really can't recommend adopting it at this point because we do see these attacks. That said, we don't see these attacks necessarily on real systems. This uses like the NVIDIA classification model.
Yeah.
So how much more data does Ford or Tesla have? I'm not sure, but that definitely would make a difference. And I think it would be interesting to start applying some of these and see what happens when you do apply these attacks to, Tesla, to one of those actual systems and see what happens.
I mean, I feel like Tesla and those types of companies should be doing that in-house already. But
well, I'm sure they do. I'm sure
but
there's
how?
some type of testing. Like I don't know um how adversarial the testing is. And I mean
Yeah,
there's so many different adversarial type attacks coming out too. Like different ideas, different concepts on how to go about this.
yeah, yeah. That's fair. I mean, yeah. I don't know if I'll ever trust AI, and when we keep reading papers like this, I just get further away from it. But
Yeah, I mean most people don't really like the idea of computers driving, and basically you're putting your life in the hands of the computer for instead of your own hands. Like it
which
takes a
in
lot of
some
trust.
cases is better. I mean, the computer is probably going to be better than you at driving in most cases, but there is the potential for tampering and stuff like that where you don't have that in like normal, human driving.
Yeah, like I mean a sticker on the road is going to make me swerve.
Yeah.
Or at least probably not.
I hopefully not.
I mean it depends on the sticker. If somebody made like one of those like perspective things where you come around a corner and it looks like the ground's like falling out there or whatever. Okay, I might
Yeah.
swerve from that sticker, but like not in the same sense of the robotic failures. And that's kind of what I was talking about before with the different types of the robots failures versus what a human might do. Human might, bad weather, going too fast, hydroplane, end up off the road. And it's like you kind of look at that, it's like, okay, that was a bad driver or like a bad driving mistake. It was a very human issue. And what the self-driving vehicles do is like, oh, we thought the semi was the sky and tried to merge into it, which happened. It was one of the first Tesla accidents or deaths.
Oh, really? I thought you were just. I thought you
No,
were just making like a bit of a joke out of that. I
no,
didn't
it
know
was
that
a
was an
white
actual thing.
semi
Oh,
vehicle driving alongside of it. It thought the white semi was the sky, and that the lane beside it was clear, so it merged into it, killing the driver.
wow, that's incredible.
The driver may have been distracted. I don't remember, but yeah. So that's definitely happened, and that's a very like computer programmer robot mistake. Like it's a very different type of issue than the normal driving. So even if it's safer for the computer to drive, the issues that come from it are exotic. So that's the exotic risk idea.
Yeah. All right. Yes. We'll stop talking about the self-driving cars because we don't want to get too cynical. Uh, but we will talk about kMVX. Yeah, kMVX. So this was a pretty interesting uh, protection that you brought up, I think. And
Yeah, it looks like there's going to be a. I think the conference already happened actually, but they haven't actually uploaded like source into the GitHub here. They do have the tarbell in there, so I haven't looked at the source to be completely fair. So I don't know how good that is compared to what they might fully release. But yeah, this was a conference presentation actually, like a conference paper.
yeah, so a little bit of background. So when you're doing kernel exploitation, um, kernel ASLR is a pretty good mitigation at killing unpowerful bugs. So, KSLR basically takes the kernel's base address and memory and randomizes it. Um, and it's a good mitigation, but it's easily broken if there's like any uninitialized data leaks. So because only the base address is randomized and the contents of the binary aren't really shuffled, uh, one pointer leak or even a partial pointer leak can completely break ASLR. So information leaks are a pretty big deal when it comes to kernel security. And the other, you know, hard thing about them is they're kind of tricky to detect. Some information leaks, like it's literally just padding that could be added by the compiler to structures. It could just be members of a structure that aren't initialized for whatever reason. Like there's so many different subtle ways that there could be information leaked, and it could only be 1 byte. But even 1 byte leak, uh, even a 1 byte leak used in the right way could be weaponized. So I remember I brought up an idea a little while ago. I think you kind of shot it down. My idea was, you would add some function in copy to user, the copy to user API, that would check for kernel pointers, and if it found them, it would overwrite them with null bytes or whatever. But obviously, that has some pretty severe overhead. And then I think what you shot it down with was, what if it's real data that just looks like a kernel pointer, right? Like there's that potential for false positives and stuff like that. And what this idea is basically running multiple instances of the kernel on the same machine and running tests at the same time and then comparing the results. So it does this thing called variant generation, which modifies the memory contents and stuff like that. And the difference of data in the leakage is what it detects. So they have, I think, 2 custom system calls that they implemented, and it basically works with the copy to user API to audit all the data being fed into it. And if what they coin as a divergence is detected, then the bytes are zeroed. But not only that, the incident is also logged. So even if there is like a false positive, it's logged, so it's easier to track down potential bugs with that. Now they do go into some information on the white paper. I'm going to open that up here about how technically they detect like some of the details that they've leaked. And what was cool about this was it had a pretty low overhead. The overhead, I think they said, was 20 to 50%, and that was in like a worst case scenario. So
20 to 50% is pretty significant overhead. I mean, sure, it's not 300, but
I mean, yeah, it is pretty significant overhead, but it's not. It seems kind of low compared to what it could be. Like I'm sure you could get it lower.
I mean, compared to some of the things we've looked at, yeah, it's low. I don't know how quick I'd still be to adopt having a 30 to 50% overhead on, essentially on the kernel, which you want as low overhead as possible. So
yeah, I mean that's definitely a fair point. But it would be hard to get low overhead with this kind of idea. I'm just trying to think of like how you could potentially do that. Like maybe do like spot checks. Don't do it on every copy to user call, but yeah, it's a tough issue. But 20 to 50%, and like I said, that is.
I mean,
worst
spot
case.
checking is not. I'm going to shoot that one down because then you just brute force it. You just need the one. You just need one to work. So I mean, it's kind of an all or nothing thing. And kind of on that though is do you have any thoughts on how you might get around this? Like, let's say it was implemented. This was default in the kernel.
Yeah. I'm like how you would get around it from an exploit perspective?
Yeah,
like,
from an exploit perspective. I mean, to be clear, I don't. I don't have any ideas at this point on how you would go around that. I'm just curious if you do.
I mean, the way I would think of is trying to make it so that difference of data, I imagine they have a threshold for what they consider a divergence and a non-divergence. Like I said, you don't need to leak like a full 8 bytes of a pointer or 16 bytes of a pointer or whatever. You don't need to leak the entire pointer in many cases. The ASLR bytes are only like 2 bytes in like kernel addresses or something like that. So if you can leak even 1 or 2 of those bytes,
yeah, or I guess if you could leak 1 at a time, even needing 2 different calls or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the way to attack it would be you'd have to be more subtle with it. You'd have to find leaks that are, that aren't extremely obvious. It's not like 30 bytes of padding or something that gets leaked, because I imagine that would probably be that'd probably be detected pretty easily. You'd have to find something that was more subtle. I don't think it would kill everything, even if it were implemented, because
no, I mean, I'm thinking, in a case that it would detect. I mean, it's not going to be perfect, obviously. There are going to be cases kind of around it.
Yeah, but I mean, even in cases where it does detect it, I think even it would only really kill the, kind of, shitty bugs. Because the more powerful bugs, you can usually derive your own info leak from a powerful bug anyway. So this wouldn't really help in that regard. So I
Yeah, I
think it
mean,
could kill a
any
lot less
read
powerful
gadget
ones,
can
but
get you wet.
yeah, basically. So I mean, I think it's a cool idea. Like info leaks are definitely an issue that's been plaguing kernel security for a while. I just don't really like you said, that performance overhead is actually fairly significant for production systems at least. What I do wonder though is could maybe apply this in a different way. And what I mean by that is they're talking about utilizing this on production systems to try to like zero out potential pointer leaks as they happen. Where I think this might be better used is if you used it from a debugging standpoint to try to find information disclosures and then patch them. Instead of like trying to fix them in real time by nulling out the bytes and whatever, just try to use this to detect info leaks and then patch them instead of deploying it on production systems. You know what I mean?
Yeah, using
Where
it
that
kind of like
overhead
that,
isn't.
using it almost like a fuzzer, using a fuzzer with it or something.
Yeah, then that overhead doesn't really matter. You don't really care as long as you're finding issues, right?
So
So
there's a question in chat from Dibma. How do you even measure the power of a bug? Since you made that comment about it not really ruining the more powerful exploits, so do you want to share an answer on that besides what I said? Is it just being how useful it is?
I mean, it's complex because you have a lot of different scenarios, but something that I would consider a powerful bug is something like a double free, because with a double free, you can target pretty much any object you want in the cache that you have the double free on. So, you can target an object that has, let's say, a function pointer to get code execution and a buffer that it writes data to get an arbitrary read. So, what I mean by a powerful bug is you want a bug that can give you more than one primitive. So, if you can get like a read write primitive, that's a powerful bug. If you can only get code execution, I wouldn't consider that a powerful bug just because you probably will need more than that to have a weaponized exploit against all the like kernel mitigations. So really, I guess what I would say is a powerful bug is a bug that you could abuse to get like an arbitrary read or an arbitrary write. That's probably how I'd quantify it. I mean, that's kind of a surface level answer. There's tons of different scenarios that you could use. Um, but that would be how I'd qualify a powerful bug, I think. Would you say that?
I
Would
wouldn't
you say
disagree on
anything?
that.
Yeah.
No, I mean that's what comes down to. I mean, I had the very simple answer of how useful it is. Having codec, just using your example there, just having code execution, I mean, that's useful, but you still need more. Whereas having the read write, you can gain other things out of that. Um,
Yeah. I mean,
yeah,
it
versatility is a good word to use, Dibma.
yeah. Yeah, and I was just gonna say quickly that kernel and userland, how they're a bit different in how I define a powerful bug. Because in kernel, the ability to execute code, obviously, that's great. But if you don't know where to jump to, like you can't on most modern systems that have SMAP and everything, you can't just use userland gadgets in a ROP chain in kernel. It just won't work. So in order to get kernel ROP gadgets, you need to get an info leak, and ideally you create your own, because then you don't need to worry about burning another bug. And in this specific white paper, you don't have to worry about it potentially killing your exploit or anything like that. But yeah, I think that pretty much sums up that question and everything on the kMVX. Did you have anything you wanted to add on that, or?
No, I think we can move on to the end-to-end encryption stuff here. Kind of another attack. Yep.
Oh, yeah, I just saw another question in there from some dude 456. Do you guys think that the payout for an exploit that uses 2 bugs should be the same as an exploit that uses 1 powerful bug?
Define payout, if you're talking about payout, like literally money wise, or like
I think that's What he means is the money wise.
I mean, in that case, what matters is the end result. I mean, if you want to sell it as just the exploit, I mean, having one more powerful exploit, I think, is going to be more valuable when you go to sell it. You're able to sell it as something that is usable in more situations, is usable, say, on more systems, or maybe it's just more stable, takes less attempts to get it, whatever. So in that sense, like, you can ask for more, just that uses one powerful bug. But ultimately, it comes down to those points. How usable is it when you're trying to sell it? Can it be used on like every kernel version ever created or something like that?
I mean, it depends a lot on the logistics of like how the sale is going to, I think. Like if you buy the bugs separately, then like it's kind of a hard question to answer because it's kind of case specific. I would deem an exploit that uses one powerful bug more valuable, just because, you know, when you're using 2 different bugs or 3 different bugs in an exploit, if even one of them gets patched, it could break the entire chain, which isn't really desirable, right? And then you have to go find a replacement for that bug, and it just becomes a big pain in the ass. The maintainability of that exploit, if anything gets patched, is fairly low. But with one bug, you know, it's less likely that happens. And like you said, you could get those, you know, stability upgrades and stuff like that. And like Dibmoss said in there, it would require and how many conditions it requires and stuff like that.
Yeah, I mean, I guess like I can see a situation where having, say, 2 bugs or even 3 can be really powerful. It depends on what those bugs are. Like there's so many conditions that could be brought up here. If it's a bunch of really finicky bugs, you know, that's going to be worth less than the one powerful. But you know, if it's 3 bugs that are, you know, reasonably stable, maybe they've been hidden for like a decade plus, you know, so you're not really risking the patch coming too quickly or accidentally. Um, Things like that. Like I could imagine some situation where multiple bugs, but I think in general, having the one more powerful bug would demand greater price. Like I think
Yeah.
as a general rule, I'd be willing to say that, but there are exceptions.
Yeah. All right. So yeah, we'll get back to the What's Up Johnny attack. So did you? I think you were talking about this before we jumped into that question. So did you want to continue on that?
Yeah, it's just basically an attack on end-to-end encryption. Kind of has 2 attack ideas, both kind of stupid simple things, but kind of fun nonetheless. One is a decryption oracle. So the idea here being that an attacker can decrypt an encrypted message. So this is using like PGP, SMIME, things like that to encrypt. The attacker does require access to the ciphertext to pull this off. To be fair, that is what end-to-end encryption exists for, you know, when the communication is compromised. So the fact that an attacker needs that, I don't think is really a hindrance to this. So the one of the most common ways of kind of going about this is just modifying the reply to address. That way, when the victim sees the message, it gets automatically decrypted, and they reply to the attacker instead of to whoever actually sent the message. So that way, when they reply, they maybe have the quote in there. It's not automatically encrypted because it's not the same target. And now the attacker gets access to it. Essentially, all this thing does is it covers some ways of hiding the hidden encrypted blob. And it just does that in kind of the obvious way, using MIME types, creates an HTML part, you know, hide it with CSS, things like that. Its example is a hidden iframe. That way a text scraper running through it won't pick it up either. Which is a fair attack. I mean, this is just something that's kind of fun. It's not something that I think I mean, check your reply to address. When you reply to somebody, look at who you're replying to. It's pretty simple.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's too much of a practical attack, but like you said, I thought the tricks were pretty clever. The way you're talking about it, I think you've probably seen some of these tricks before, so maybe you weren't as impressed with it as I
Oh, so
was.
I actually really like the idea. The signature one. I thought that was kind of neat. So the signature, I'll let you kind of jump in with what you liked, but the signature one, basically what that did is it's a way of getting a message signed by somebody else, getting them to sign your message. The example it gives is like, I declare war on somebody. I don't remember who they said they were declaring war on, but they wanted to make, their victim sign this message, making it look like they declared war on somebody.
Yeah.
So in this case, how that worked is they would use the CSS again to hide or show content using different things that would change by who's viewing it. So it'd be a message where when your victim views it, they just see some innocuous message. But when, whoever you want to forward it to sees this signed message from whoever else, you just kind of send them along this signed message. When they view it, the CSS would be different. And on that, on their viewer, they would see this other side message, the I declare war.
Yeah, so I was just gonna say, like, basically, I thought those tricks were really clever. So, like you were saying, using the CSS conditionals to hide text and messages to turn victims into signing oracles. I thought those were like really clever attacks, but it kind of sounds like you already knew about these kinds of attacks before the reading this paper. So I guess
definitely not in this context. And like, I mean, you kind of see some kind of creative stuff coming up when it comes like some clickjacking attacks, some UI redressing. You see some similar concepts, but no, like this is definitely novel to me. In the context of email, for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I could definitely see this being used in phishing attacks. I just, I
don't think this would really be for phishing, to be fair. Like, I mean, the signed email, and this is something that's also really obvious. If you just, control U or like view source of your email, then it's really obvious. Like, I don't know about your email client, but I know I always set mine up just to use text, and when things don't appear right, I control U and try and read it. Maybe that's not a standard practice by everybody, but that's at least kind of how I go about it, and that would make it really obvious that things are being hidden.
Yeah, I mean, what I meant more from the phishing angle was just that it was like, you do require having that, like you said, it could be basically this attack could be destroyed by just looking at the reply to address. So, yeah,
well, to be fair, the signing one isn't so much the return to. Like, in theory, you could forward, like you could show that same signed message to somebody else. I think the idea would be that they reply to somebody else, and see, there are ways you can kind of do that with a reply to, but yeah, like reply to in general is just sketchy.
Yeah.
Although you can always just edit the from too. I mean, it's not like a lot of these. Actually, I guess like Gmail does do the verification. A lot of mail servers don't actually verify kind of sources and do all the extra steps. I mean, it is just a header being sent. There's no real check on who's sending email.
Yeah. One thing I did want to bring up before we kind of wrap it up, though, is I wanted to point out a pretty cheeky statement they made. Until today, it has a high reputation among activists, journalists, and privacy enthusiasts, implying that like this white paper is like killed PGP or something. I thought that was a pretty funny statement. I don't know if you saw that.
Yeah, I just kind of read that as like that's until today actually. I mean it's probably it doesn't kill it. There's standard practices. Watch who you're replying to. That's kind of a standard practice. So I don't. My opinion of PGP has not been reduced dramatically because of this.
Yeah, no, this is a people problem, not a PGP problem. I mean, yeah.
Oh, it's an email problem. An email.
Yeah, an email problem.
Email is like this mishmash of stuff that
Well, I think it's both. I think it's an HTML problem or like an email problem and a people problem.
Yeah, well, exploiting it's a people
split.
problem.
Yeah.
Problem exists between keyboard and chair.
Yeah. Yeah. So I thought that was a pretty funny statement. Probably just a joke they threw in there, but I mean, it is a white paper, so I don't know if.
Yeah, we don't know how seriously they're actually taking themselves with it or not, but I read a white paper in a more serious note, but
yeah, usually. Yeah.
Given the fact that they also titled, what did they title this? Like, What's Up, Johnny? I think it was.
Yeah, What's Up, Johnny? Yeah.
I mean, they gave it that type of title. I could see them just not taking themselves super seriously with this.
Yeah. All right. So we're now going to talk about another. I think this is what you were kind of referring to when we were talking earlier about the AI stuff. This is yet another.
This one is another fun trick. I'm liking that word for this stream. It's
which AI or trick?
Fun. Well, calling it a fun issue.
Trick.
Yeah. So, if you scroll down just a little bit, you can kind of see the core of this issue is they essentially create a patch you can wear so that you're not detected as a human.
Yeah, that thing right there.
Yeah, like, I mean, they take it in a few different ways. They also look doing this with stop signs. So, like, AI isn't detecting stop signs, but this is...
I didn't see that one. I don't know.
I don't think they have a picture of it, but they talk about their classification against that. And I mean, yeah, the idea here is essentially just creating something that you can wear that hides you from being detected as a person. There are a couple issues with this one. Again, this would be like a first step. It is a frame thing. In this frame, they are not detected as a person. As they're walking, if they're being seen from the side, I imagine they suddenly are being detected as a person. But they're only really focusing on the still images and hiding it for the still image. And a lot of these systems are going to be video systems. And just kind of talking about the actual attack scenario, like, let's just say my local casino was doing person tracking like this, had some automate system for that. How do you figure out what system they're even running?
Yeah,
like I honestly, like, you could probably do something like, there's probably some social engineering, like you could figure it out, but that seems like a really big barrier to figure out, especially if this doesn't just universally work across all systems, ignoring the whole video aspect, which I think is another big failure here. But like I said, this is a first step. It's just like a proof of concept saying, like, hey, you can wear a picture around your waist and you're not detected as human anymore. Like, maybe you should keep this in mind when, the Terminator stuff starts happening.
I mean, they also said we create a small, around 40 centimeters by 40 centimeters adversarial patch. I don't know if I consider that small. That's pretty big. I mean,
yeah, I mean, it's definitely, it would be more interesting if this was like, hey, you put a few stickers on, like small stickers, and suddenly it trips it up, and maybe that could be done. Cool. That would be almost practical if it's something that could blend in.
Yeah.
But I mean, the thing is, like, sure, you're not automatically detected as a human. Anybody watching the footage is obviously seeing you as a human and is probably noticing, like, people around are probably noticing, like, what's with this guy?
Yeah. We'll just walk a little bit further away from him. He doesn't seem to be all in his right mind wearing a big picture of whatever that is.
Right? Yeah, but the core concept, though, I think that's kind of a cool idea. Like, finding a patch that hides you from human detection. I mean, that's...
Yeah. So, I mean, the basic idea seems to be trying to do something that catches the AI off guard. Like, kind of like the opposite of a poisoning attack, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, this is more adversary. Like, it's just not trained with that adversarial data.
Yeah. What I do wonder, though, maybe it probably does go into more technical detail about why this specific example works. Like, what if that was on a t-shirt or something? It probably wouldn't work the same way, right?
Well, so they have some other actual examples. Like, there are more pictures towards the end of this. I'm just trying to find it here.
Oh, those ones there. Oh, no, apparently not.
No, the ones that were kind of coming up, right towards the end here.
Okay.
No, those aren't the ones I'm thinking of either. They had one where it was like it wasn't a picture like it is in this case. It was just static. It looked like.
But looking at those pictures you have up there now, look at how he's holding the same patch, but if he holds it on an angle, it still detects him as a person.
Yeah, so
And
that's something that they
that's
talked about. Like there
weird.
was no constant place where you could keep that and you would like between people and it would automatically just not detect you. Like it wasn't always just around the waist and stuff.
So you had to have a lot of luck, basically.
Yeah.
Yeah, so not really practical at all.
Not really.
Yeah, what I was thinking of when I was looking at it was maybe it was the shape, because you noticed like the patch or whatever they're calling it. It would modify the shape of the body a little bit. It would have the square edges around where you normally have the torso. I was wondering if maybe that was part of it, but
I
I don't
mean,
know
it's
if they're
hard to
saying they.
say what exactly is causing it to miscalculate it.
Yeah,
Because I mean, with so many of these AIs, like you don't know how it's making its determination.
yeah, yeah, and that's something you brought up as part of the reason why it's not really practical, because it's like you can't really determine that, especially in like a casino, for example.
Though I
Like
do like a Dibmaz idea here. It would be cool to have a stop sign T-shirt that forces cars to stop at crosswalks.
that'd probably work too.
I
Well,
mean, if
maybe
you could
not
find
like.
a way to make the vehicle, see you as a stop sign. I imagine, though, in the future, as 5G rolls out and stuff, one of the big things they're kind of touting is vehicle to vehicle communication and vehicle to everything communication. So in that case, it would be like, hey, I'm a stop sign, and as a person, you wouldn't be able to respond to that type of interaction, like that digital interaction.
Well, I
So that
was
would only
thinking
work
if.
for a short time, but yeah, that's another just fun idea with this is making AI think you're a stop sign.
Well, I was thinking the hope was once you got that like vehicle to vehicle communication, you wouldn't even need stop signs, because stop signs are just mainly for humans to use, right? To as like a communication method.
Well,
Once cars can
presumably not
communicate
all
with
the
each other.
vehicles are going to be AI controlled.
Okay, yeah, that's true. That's a fair point. Um, but yeah, I wonder if that could actually work even today. If you had like maybe not a shirt with like a printout on it, but if you wore like a stop sign reflective thing, if you attached it to yourself or something, it'd probably work.
I mean, I could imagine some system. I don't know if that would work against something that have a lot of data over what a stop sign looks like.
Yeah,
Um,
that's maybe not. Yeah.
And I imagine there's also, I'm pretty sure like Tesla has information regarding that, like where stop signs are and stuff. So yeah, it does some detection, but it also has a data set of information.
Yeah, it does like GPS or whatever, right? Like to detect
Yeah, well, I mean,
signs.
GPS isn't necessarily the best thing to use, just, GPS inaccuracies and stuff, but um like I just mean I believe there's more data already being used that would kind of make it difficult to work, except in a proof of concept situation where it's some kind of dumb situation.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think that pretty much concludes this like paper. It's mostly just fun, like, that's going to be our keyword of the episode, but it's mainly just like, theoretical attacks that what if this could happen, but nothing really concrete, nothing that could be used in a practical scenario.
Yeah,
Um
again, you want to see this being done like against Tesla, against those systems. Of course, those are harder to test against because they are somewhat closed.
yeah, unless you have a couple $100,000 to buy a Tesla and all the testing equipment, you're probably not going to be able to do too much in that
I mean,
regard.
they're university
Um,
students. University students are rich.
yeah, totally. Uh, but yeah, so we'll move on to something that kind of helps out our podcast name. 0 day, day
Yeah,
zero.
let's actually talk
Uh,
about a 0 day.
well, a few 0 days. We're lucky this week. So the first one is an RCE in EA's Origin desktop client. So Origin, it's a pretty popular client, right? So you have like Well, it used to be only Steam, but now there's so many different gaming clients. You have like Steam, BattleNet, Origin, etc. And the Origin client is so the vulnerability is basically a template injection. So they use this parameter called title to insert the title of the game into the activation required pop-up, and it turns out that that title value is not sanitized or anything, so you can inject right into the template.
Yeah, so
And
I think it's also interesting here just to point out that it's using this Origin 2 protocol, or it's using like a custom handler. So it's similar kind of to last week, where we had the issue with the Qt stuff being able to drop into the plugin path and giving those arguments. This is a different, like the attack scenario here is different. But again, this is in a custom protocol, so it's attacking a desktop application with this type of template injection.
yeah, and so another little bit of background is that apparently Origin runs on AngularJS. I think it's around like version 1.3 or something like that. So because of that, AngularJS has a sandbox, but from what I know about AngularJS sandboxes aren't too difficult to escape. There's public sandbox escapes for like every version there is. So they basically just used like one that was already public and chained it with their template injection to get command execution through Qt's Q Desktop Services API. So I think it talks a little bit about that.
Oh,
right
so
here.
Qt's in this one again too.
Yep. They use the Q Desktop Services to pop calc. So, yep.
Yeah,
Qt
essentially
backup
this
again.
is. Yeah, I mean, I definitely would not blame this one on Qt though.
No.
Like in this case,
not.
the issue is squarely like the issue here is in how Origin's using this. Although, since you've scrolled down there on the disclosure timeline, I do want to give them credit. Vulnerability reported on April 16th and vulnerability patched on April 16th.
That's a quick turnaround.
That is, I mean, to be fair, there like a lot of companies have, when you have these critical issues, they'll actually have like, we are going to have a response to this. Like within, if this gets reported, there's like 15 minutes to get a team up on it, and then there's like 3 hours or 6 hours to, be doing X, Y, or Z, and then like 24 hours to patch or something like that. Like that's a sign of like a mature security program. So I don't know a lot. Like we don't have a lot of details. All we know is it's reported and patched on the same day, and public disclosure on the same day. But I mean, it is a good sign towards their security posture if they are able to respond to these so quickly. Obviously, this is a pretty simple issue to fix. It's not like there's some complicated thing to dig into. So, I mean, it seems like it would be an easy patch, but, they got to it same day, and that is somewhat impressive.
Yeah. One question this does kind of bring up, though, is like, these types of issues are they're not very hard to come across when you're talking about JS stuff, right? Like it's just like template injection is pretty common, wouldn't you say? In terms of
I don't know about that. I mean, obviously XSS is somewhat common. Template injection it falls in a very similar vein, although now you need to be generating the template dynamically. And a lot of applications just don't do that. They just don't do a dynamic generation of the template. They just use the template.
Yeah.
So I don't think it's that common, actually. Like, it's not something I run into on, like, every assessment or something. It's definitely there. It's an issue. And I think it's going to become more common as we see more applications moving towards, like, Angular moving towards having these client-side templates.
And I mean, that is something that is kind of worrying me, that more and more desktop applications are starting to use these web, like JS frameworks. So like these types of issues are now going to be a lot more dangerous in the way that they can be used.
Yeah, that's fair. But at the same time, like just in terms of the web aspect, I mean, this is I think a lot better than just plain old JavaScript pages where you had a lot more clean XSS in there. I would rather
Yeah.
see sites at least using this because there is at least some baseline. It's a lot more difficult to kind of accidentally do this than it is to just accidentally echo a value out that was user input. Like in this case, like you need to be dynamically generating that template itself, not just using a static template. And that's generally just a bad practice in general. Well, yeah, generally a bad practice in general. I'm using that word a lot too. But yeah. I mean, I'd say this, at least using Angular, it's a step up from just your classic XS. So I think that's a good move. Seeing it on the desktop obviously is somewhat concerning.
Yeah.
In this case, so they got the command injection kind of through you needing to communicate with something else, which maybe isn't going to be there on all applications.
Yeah. So I was looking a bit at AngularJS sandboxing because I was curious. And so one statement I found was that the AngularJS sandbox was never really considered as a security barrier, which is kind of silly. And apparently in 1.6, it was actually removed entirely. So, talking a little bit about using JavaScript and using like these types of frameworks in desktop applications, I think it could work, but I do think that there's not enough focus on security in that area, and there needs to be more of it. Like the sandboxing and stuff like that needs to really be worked on before I start to accept it into more desktop clients. I think that would
Yeah, I
be
mean, I
like,
can understand that concern. At the same time, this does require that it's being exposed in this callable way. The Origin 2 handler. Not every application is exposing every view like that. Now, when it has like a web app and a desktop that's essentially the web app, then it kind of becomes more clear as to what you might be able to call and stuff. But it does require that in order to exploit this. Okay. that is a difference with these desktop ones. They need to expose some of this functionality still. Now, there have been attacks in the past, like doing a phishing page on, I don't remember what the application was, but essentially one issue with these, they are effectively a browser being shown to you, but you don't see the URL bar. So if you manage to get redirected somewhere, like a phishing page, you don't see it as a phishing page. You don't have a clear indicator that, hey, this isn't using HTTPS, or hey, this is some fake Russian website and not actually google.com that I'm entering my credentials into. Albeit we just talked about how Google's kind of blocking some of that stuff, logins from the web view, so you wouldn't be able to do that. But
yeah,
that idea, like there are some interesting risks that come from desktop applications like this, but they also remove some risks. Like you don't see what is it? You don't see the buffer overflows as much, like in that. It still might be in the Chromium, but like assuming it's Electron, running Chromium in there. But it takes care of some issues too. So yeah, they're different issues, but they're maybe dealing with some also. Like there's a trade-off going on.
yeah. And Dibmov from the chat just said, mentioned an attack where like Firefox going full screen and then creating a fake address bar with HTML. That's an interesting attack too. I never really thought about that.
Yeah, there's actually another one similar to that. It would fake a so it would look at what like operating system you're using and things like that, and then it would fake a window popping up outside, like as though it were a new window entirely. And it would just look like it's a new window, but it's actually part of the browser window that you're on. So it looked like you're logging into Google or something, and it pops up and it looks like the right URL. Like they have all the graphics right. And it's just like, because if you've ever used like Google for a single sign-on, like maybe you've clicked the link and it pops up a little box and like in a new window instead of just taking you over to Google, it gives you a new window. It would simulate that, but the entire display was inside of your browser window, so the attacker can see everything you were entering. You weren't actually communicating with them. And that's kind of what I was talking about when I talked about some of the UI redress type attacks.
It's amazing how like clever you can get when it comes to browser stuff. Like you can do so many like interesting,
They're quite
clever attacks.
powerful. Browsers can do a lot now.
Yep, gotta love browsers. So yeah, so that sums that up. We'll talk about some Windows 0 days. These are a bit more technical, and so I like them more. They're more fun. So this is yet another Windows OS vulnerability that's been discovered after it's been exploited in the wild. This is like, how many has it been now? Because we've covered some on this podcast before. I feel like this is like,
I think they actually mention count. Like they mention a few of them there. I think I see 4 CVs. Or this is the 5th consecutive local privilege escalation vulnerability found recently. Kind of right in the
right here,
very end.
There we go. There's our answer right there. Yeah, so there's been a lot of Windows activity lately in terms of like APT and stuff, it seems. And so this was, of course, the bug in this case was in Win32k. So for those of you listening that don't know too much about Windows, full disclosure, I'm not like a big Windows person either, but Win32k is known as like the bug farm for Windows vulnerabilities. A lot of Windows apps are starting to try to move away from it. I think like browsers like Chrome and stuff don't use it anymore, where they used to a while ago. They designed entire security mitigations around mitigating access to Win32k. Like that's how bad the code is. So yeah, this bug is of course in Win32k. It's a UAF. The technical details are a bit obscure because it uses, it's the Windows window API functionality. So if you're not too familiar with that terminology, it can be a bit difficult to try to parse what it's saying. But basically, it was just saying with the window manager that you could cause a UAF, and I think it's pretty cool, like seeing all these Windows exploit. I guess cool and scary at the same time, because Windows is, it's a huge OS. It's used by almost everyone in terms of like clients and stuff. Maybe not for servers, but for desktop users and stuff, it's the most popular OS. So yeah, what another interesting part of it though was they said that they couldn't find who was actually the target of the campaign. They said at this time we don't have any information at the time regarding the target. So it's definitely an interesting read. If the link will be in the description if you want to check that out. Did you catch anything that I missed there, Z?
Well, I just want to make mention. The APT groups were dubbed Sandcat and Fruity Armor. Those are the 2 groups.
Those are some wonderful.
Who names these groups? I mean, this is kind of, I wish Auntie was on with this one. Maybe he could enlighten us a little bit about that. But
yeah,
because I know, like with malware, you get the names usually like there's some signature in the code, like that's used in the signature detection. There's something unique about it that stands out, and then they just kind of like take that, merge it, and you kind of make a name out of it. I don't know if they do something similar when they look at these APT groups or not. But like, I just want to know who thought of like Fruity Armor. Obviously, that's not the name that they go by. Like somebody, like a researcher's chosen to name them that, and I don't know. I just want to know the story behind why they chose Fruity Armor. Like, did they feel that they were doing some like extra little security step, like adding some little armor on their, whatever they had, like exploit kit or something that was just they felt was fruity? Like, I don't know, but
it almost just seems like a random name generator. So they have like arrays of words, and then they just
it could be. I honestly have no idea.
Like that would be like Sandcat would be something you'd think would come out of a random generator. Like, yeah. Interesting question though. Like we got to ask Auntie that next time we're on. We got to write down on our little notebook. We have to ask him that. We'll follow up with that, see where these names come from. Because I am actually like that is a curious question that, like,
I'm sure we could Google it if we cared enough.
Maybe. Yeah. So I don't want to talk about the Windows 0 Day too much, other than just that it's been posted. I don't see any technical write up linked or anything in this. That being said, I haven't looked very much for one. But if you're a Windows person, then this is probably going to be an interesting read, uh, especially if you want to learn a bit more about Win32K and the Windows like window management stuff in Windows. Um, but I think from that we can move on to the Adblock Plus filter exploit. So this was
Let me just interject. If you're
Yep.
using Adblock Plus, just switch to uBlock.
Oh, you're just gonna
Yeah, I just want to toss a plug in there. Yeah, absolutely.
just shilling uBlock. Yeah, so this is another case of basically a feature being abused. So what it is they have this feature called they have filters, right? So you can set filters on websites and the content that they produce, and one of the filters that they allow is something called a rewrite filter. So you can use a rewrite filter to replace code on sites with or like text from sites with other text. And the idea of this attack is using that to maliciously inject code. But usually, uh, it's pretty restricted. It's designed to only load content from a first party source. So generally, you can't really load content from another site. And there's some other types of requests that aren't permitted. But I think that this vulnerability basically bypasses that. And yeah, it says right here, you can use it to load content from remote locations. There are some conditions that need to be met here. So, the string needs to be loaded using XML, HTTP request, or fetch. The origin cannot be restricted on the page, and the origin of the code must have a server-sided open redirect. So I was just kind of reading that from that list there. But one of the most interesting things I found about this article was it says, I tried the exploit in Chrome and Firefox and could not get it to work. So I wonder what kind of technical things are getting in the way of exploiting it on Chrome and Firefox.
So that actually probably has to do with the changes to their the changes to the plugin system. I don't know for sure if that's the case, but as you're mentioning it, my initial thought is changes to the plugin system, because what they've started disallowing are things that will block the page loading. So if you want to make a rewrite or a modification, that will end up blocking while it loads or while it does something. You're basically just not allowed that level of access anymore.
Okay.
So I believe that's where it would come down. It's just in how they've locked down plugins, so you just can't do that anymore.
Yeah, though it did say here that this other person over on Bleeping Computer managed to get it to work, though. And I think that, I don't know if that means specifically on Chrome and Firefox,
So it could be, I could just be completely wrong. Like I said, that was just my initial thought as you mentioned that, is they have made some changes to plugin security, which might be blocking it. Or that could be completely unrelated.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, yeah, we can just speculate because I don't see any details specifically why that's the case in the article. The other notable requirement, though, of the attack is obviously you do need to be able to set a filter. So an attacker would need to be able to have control over a filter that you have running, or you'd have to get it into like a filter list or something, which is a pretty notable requirement. And the other thing on top of that is apparently Adblock is going to remove the rewrite function from future versions. So it seems that attack's probably going to die here, at least for Adblock. I don't know about other like ad blocking softwares. Like the two main ones are Adblock and uBlock Origin, but
well, there's Adblock and there's Adblock Plus and there's uBlock Origin.
Yeah, on top of all the
like
other miscellaneous
Adblock
ones.
and Adblock Plus are not, the same.
What's the main difference? I don't want to go too deep down that rabbit hole, but like I honestly don't really know what the big difference is between ABP and AB.
My understanding is they're different applications. Period.
So one of them just copied the name or something.
I mean, there probably was at some point like a fork or whatever. Like there might have been something like that. I don't. I know I've looked at the history a couple times,
Okay.
but it's definitely not something I've looked at any time recently.
Yeah,
But
it's not too
yeah, I
important.
mean,
It's just a
it's
personal curiosity,
my
really.
basically it's not like they're different applications. It's not like ABP or um it's not like it's just a plus version of it. It's not they're not related.
Okay. Yeah, so I could maybe see these kinds of attacks happening in other ad blocking software that have similar functionalities. But that being said, with that requirement of needing a filter and the fact that Adblock is going to remove that feature, it's, you know, I think it's cool to touch on that it happened, but I don't think it's going to be something that's going to be a big issue going forward or anything like that. I think this is pretty much going to kill that attack. Um,
Yeah, and I'm not completely sure um if uBlock is actually kind of vulnerable to that. I don't think uBlock has a like uh that type of filter in it.
I don't think it does either. I don't know if it mentions it. Yeah, it says, the extension uBlock origin is not affected because it doesn't support rewrite.
Yeah, because I mean that kind of comes down to the different architectures that they use to do the blocking.
Yeah.
So like I think Adblock Plus is one of the only ones that actually just supports that completely arbitrary rewrite.
Until the next version, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we'll move on from that and we'll go into the DACL permission overwrite privilege escalation. So this was another Windows bug, and it's actually quite cool. It's an issue that you'd come across more likely in a like a CTF, and I'm just Deb Moss said something. Did you want to bring that up with the adblock stuff?
Yeah, or Dibmon just says Adblock sold out to some companies and then people started forking the project, didn't it? That sounds like what I remember. But yeah, I don't have the information offhand to actually confirm that, but that sounds right to me.
Sounds reasonable, yeah. So yeah, I just wanted to quickly get that out of the way. So back to the DACL permissions overwrite. So basically, the issue is that they abuse hard links to make the system modify the permissions of an arbitrary file. So each app, including Microsoft Edge, has this settings.dat file in the app data folder for it, and that just has like registry information and stuff like that related to that application. And if that file is corrupted or anything like that, automatically on startup, it does some basic integrity checks. So it lists them right here. So it does a check on the file permissions, and if it's incorrect, then it'll correct them. Read the file content, and it will restore the file if it's corrupted, and then gets an exclusive lock on that file, and then it'll start the Windows app. So the key to the issue there, I think, is this first point, that if the file permissions are incorrect, then it'll correct it. So basically, when it goes to do that, if you create a hard link from that .dat file to some other file that you shouldn't have access to, this article goes into the host file specifically, then you could use that to change the permissions of that file to make it so that unprivileged users can read and write and execute to it or whatever. So uh, you just relink that settings.dat to whatever you want, and you can get arbitrary permissions on that. And I thought that was just a really cool bug. It's kind of something like I've seen symlink exploits in CTFs and stuff, but you don't really think about it being used too often in like real world scenarios.
Definitely,
Like,
I've seen kind of in the real world. Because that
okay,
comes down to misconfiguration type issues. Actually, probably one of the places I'd see it most is relating more to linking in files like in Docker or something, and then you link a host file and basically escapes where you can write something on the host system from the Docker container, blah blah blah. But long story short, like, oh no, I definitely see symlink related stuff come up every so often. It's not a big part of like what I do, since I tend to focus on applications rather than on like the full deployment, and like, I don't do the network pen testing as much, but that is something that's seen kind of at that level.
Yeah.
I mean, not quite this, particular attack, but other ideas using kind of sim linking the wrong files, and yeah, getting access to stuff that way. Like you get to make a sim link to the wrong file.
Yeah. So this article does actually provide a video of the POC in action. I think it also, they also posted the POC code. I actually didn't take a look at that, but it's here on GitHub, so we'll have that in the external links section of the description as well. Just the one repo, it seems. But yeah, pretty cool attack, and yet another Windows bug. Gotta love Windows. So I guess from that we'll wrap up. We'll talk about this other
Wrap
vulnerability.
up with Cisco. Wrap up with an iOS bug.
Yeah, iOS.
I mean, hey, Cisco had it first.
Yeah. I mean, I looked at it. I don't think we can talk too much about it because there isn't a ton of technical information.
No, it's actually a really stupid. Well, I can guess as to what happened here. This is most likely a dev change that made its way to prod. I would not want to be the one that get blame on this, because if you look at what their suggested like patches, the workaround, it's uncommenting two lines in one of the configuration files. It's the two lines that tell it, what interface to listen on. So I'm assuming without that. So the issue here, for anybody that hasn't read it yet, is essentially administrative interface wasn't isolated properly. So somebody on the network could access the sysadmin VM and all the fun things that go along with that. Yeah, you found it there. It's literally just uncomment those two lines telling it what appears to be, I'm assuming, VRF is related to the interface that's going on. I don't know, but the fact that just that simple comment, I'd bet this is just a dev kind of commented them out while working on it, and it made its way into prod. But yeah, it's a really simple issue here. It's just listening on presumably all interfaces instead of just local.
Yeah. So just to sum that up a bit, the impact was apparently you could allow an unauthenticated remote attacker to access internal applications, or you could cause it to potentially crash or something like that. Vulnerability was given a 9.8 base score. It's pretty high. I don't know.
You've got an admin interface listening out to the network, so yeah.
Yeah, I guess that's fair. But
kind of compromised everything there. It's
yeah. So that'll conclude all the topics we were going to talk about today. Auntie will hopefully be back with us again next week. We'll have to see how that plays out. But yeah, that pretty much concludes the Day Zero podcast. All the links and stuff for what we talked about will be in the description, and we will see you guys next week.